The Dallas Mavericks have been eliminated from playoff contention. They threw in the towel against the Bulls by resting all their key players besides Luka Doncic. But Doncic only played for the first quarter, and he wouldn't sub back in for the rest of the game, even during a tight fourth quarter. And the only reason he suited up in the first place was because it was Slovenian Heritage Night. If this was any other Friday, that man would have been sitting at home like the rest of his teammates. Dallas would lose the game, which eliminated them from playoff contention, but in doing so, they can maintain the 10th overall pick. All Dallas had to do to overtake OKC and make the play-in was beat the 10th seed Bulls and the 15th seed Spurs. But they just decided to give up. Now, I've seen instances where a team is clearly losing on purpose, but this one is pretty blatant. So I'm not surprised that the NBA is launching an investigation into this matter. There's tanking that starts towards the beginning of a season or even towards the final couple games of one, where a team shuts down their starters, plays their young guys, that kind of thing. And then there's making an abrupt U-turn with 2 games left in the season because you decided you want to keep a lottery pick rather than fighting in the play-in. The spirit of competition can waver, but if you pull too hard, you will tear the fabric. And then you create a much larger problem for yourself. The Mavs were already on a downward spiral, and this is just the cherry on top. Just examine this team. They have Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving on their roster, but the Mavericks have had a disappointing 9-17 record since they picked up the superstar combo guard, and they're 9-10 in the games he has played. Well, has Kyrie underperformed in these games? Is he the problem? No. In truth, he's been the team's lifeline in some games, and especially Dallas' savior in the fourth. Luka is Luka. Mentioning his stats really don't serve a purpose because anyone who knows what a basketball looks like knows how good he is. Even with the decrease in his efficiency for the month of March, 43% on the field is kind of unheard of for him, but that just speaks to how high he set the bar for himself. And to finish out the year, his numbers went back to normal, as you'd expect. You have 2 S-tier offensive weapons in your backcourt, but you can't make the 10th seed? Pay attention, folks. Dallas is a masterclass in how to improperly structure a roster. Can you believe this team made the conference finals last year? This is a more common occurrence than you think. Truthfully, this team has always been a little embellished. What do I mean? The Kyrie trade happened on February 6, 2023. The Mavericks record by that date, before the deal, was 29-26. That's a positive win-loss record, but is not acceptable for a team with championship aspirations. Well, the Mavericks record by February 6, 2022 was 31 wins, 23 losses. Pretty similar. That's only 2 games behind. So how does the club finish 52-30 in one instance, then in another they don't even crack 40? It's because they finished the 2021-22 campaign with a blazing 22-7 record. That's what a hot streak will do for you. But such turnarounds don't come often, which I assume the Mavericks front office was aware of, which is why when a talent of Kyrie Irving's caliber becomes available, you pull the trigger. Problem is, you don't trade for a dude like that when you don't have the assets to cover your exchange. They lucked into trading for him in the first place because of very favorable circumstances. But quick fixes can have long-term effects when you're making impetuous decisions. You don't go and get a Ferrari on a waiter's salary, and if fortune grants you one as a gift, it's best to decline because you can't afford the expenses of keeping it. Kyrie is getting paid this summer, that's a given, and if Dallas doesn't pay him, how do they look? You swung for the fences mid-season to get this guy. If he walks away and all you got was a 2-month rental, you just made the worst goddamn trade anyone's seen in a long time. They have to pay him or it's all for naught, and with Dallas' salary situation, that will bind their hands. But with him skipping the exit presser, the future looks bleak. But let's say they get lucky and they re-sign him. In that case, you're not keeping Christian Wood. When your 2 biggest trade targets are on the last year of their deals, that confirms one thing to the observant eye. Your team lacks real assets. There are no trade scenarios that the Dallas Mavericks could have realistically targeted to pair Doncic with another superstar who is guaranteed to stay for a couple of years. This team is like your broke friend, all they can afford are rentals, and whatever value they had was gutted getting Irving. Dallas's biggest loss didn't impact their scoring, but it detrimentally impacted their defense. Since the Kyrie trade, the Mavs have had a defensive rating of 118.2, which sits 26th in the league. In that same period, they held the 8th highest offensive rating in the league. So their offense definitely improved, but pre-trade to post-trade, they went from surprisingly 8th in opponent points per game to 20th. And that's what happens when you trade the only good defender on your team, Dorian Finney-Smith. Majority of the bad defense comes down to the lack of individual defenders, but part of it comes down to coaching, and the coaching has been under fire this entire season. Go on Twitter, search Fire Kid, and you'll see how much the city of Dallas loves former champion Jason Kidd. 2 years into the job, after a really good first season, this man is on the chopping block. And the most mind-boggling thing about Jason Kidd's coaching is that he was considered a defensive-minded coach, and that's been their killer the last 2 years. This team plays some of the worst team defense I've ever seen. Try to watch a full Mavericks game. The amount of poor communication, especially on rotations, is absurd. It's like watching a college team. Not being able to coach the one thing they brought you in for is going to be tough to answer. Jason Kidd isn't the best coach, but he can't make water out of wine. The majority of the blame on the defensive end comes down to the players. When you have a backcourt that's as bad as Irving and Doncic on the defensive end, there's only so much you can do. And before Kyrie got there, Spencer Dinwiddie and Tim Hardaway Jr. weren't any better. LeBron is tell me if you heard this before, all-encompassing advanced statistic that is, to put it simply, very good at identifying good players. And D LeBron is the defensive version of the stat, and is honestly one of the most accurate metrics at determining good individual defenders. The top 3 D LeBron leaders this year are Jaren Jackson Jr., Brook Lopez, and Nicholas Claxton. All 3 of them are candidates for Defensive Player of the Year. So compared to defensive rating and defensive box plus minus, which have noticeable flaws, D LeBron is a lot more credible. Luka Doncic has a D LeBron of negative 0.91. Kyrie Irving's is negative 0.67. You can't fault Kyrie because you traded for him. You knew he wasn't a good defender. That's been a problem with his game for years now. And this is where you honestly have to critique Luka Doncic then. His defense is a concern, and he is not exempt from blame just because of how great he is on offense. I'll praise his scoring and playmaking abilities all day. He's generational in those aspects. But this season, Doncic has been one of the worst defenders in the league, and that's been a continuous pattern for him. And yeah, he carries a heavy burden on offense, but you have to make an effort to at least get down the court, or to keep guys in front of you, or to at least stay attached to somebody on a pick and roll, or help with something, and he'll tell you this himself. But if he wants to be in that conversation with Giannis, Embiid, Jokic, KD, even Jason Tatum, he needs to start playing defense. Jokic and KD aren't going to win any Defensive Player of the Year awards, but those guys are not liabilities. And the truth is, Luka Doncic is a liability on the defensive end. Defense is the divider between NBA champions and conference champions. But I don't really place too much of the blame on Doncic. I felt the same way when people criticized Harden when he had no help. Yes, acknowledge that Luka is a defensive liability, but let's not ignore the situation he's in or the guys he's playing with. If Mark Cuban wants to keep Luka, he better find a way to dig himself out of a hole, because losing Luka Doncic would be the biggest mistake of his life. Thanks for watching.